Okay, I think we're live, but 0 viewers, so we'll just noodle until somebody tunes in. Got a minute or so anyway.
Yeah.
So this will be at the top of the YouTube recording. Just to explain to anybody who's watching the recorded version, we started a minute early, so we're just waiting for other participants to join this live version of the Hangout before we start getting into questions. So just bear with us for a minute or two. Of course, nobody may join at all, in which case Glenn and I will just talk about obscure 1980s rock acts and things like that.
Yeah, sounds like a plan to me.
Okay, well, we will wait just a little bit longer, and then Glenn and I will start for the recorded version purposes, and people will join in as they choose as they come along. So we'll just give it another 30 seconds or so. No viewers yet live, but I'm optimistic people will join us before too long. Okay, well, I think because we're now recording and we're a minute into it, Glenn, we'll get underway. So for those of you watching the recorded version, and for anybody who manages to join us imminently, this is the Google Hangout for the Community Journalism online course from FutureLearn. I'm Professor Richard Sambrook, and joining me also one of my colleagues from Cardiff University is Glenn Mottershead. Hi, Glenn.
Hi, Richard.
And the viewers are coming in live fast now. I can see the numbers building up, so that's very good. So let's get underway. Now, this is obviously in the final week of the online course. If you're watching, you're able to ask us questions live if you use the group chat function here on Google Plus. On the Hangout, but we've got a few questions that people have sent in earlier. So Glenn and I will get underway having a discussion about those questions that came in on the course bulletin boards and so on. But if you want to ask questions, please just type them away in the group chat function on G+. That's the blue thing in the sidebar on the left that comes up, and we'll deal with it live over the next hour. So we're going to be on air for about an hour here. So Glenn obviously is also the person who did the modules on setting up your own blogs and using WordPress and so on as well. So if you have particular questions about that, he's able to help. But he's got much broader experience and leads the digital journalism and computational journalism courses at Cardiff University. So he's an excellent person for us to have for this final week's conversation and wrap up about the online course on community journalism. Now, first question then, let's just get into a general question. Natalie Dunn asked on the site, can community be a community of interest? The course is focusing on hyperlocal journalism, but community can be anything else, not just geographical. So how do you go about building a site focusing on a non-geographical community of interest, I guess that is. Glenn, that's something that you've obviously got some experience with, indeed teach at Cardiff. What are some of the secrets to building an audience if it's something other than geography that they've got in common?
The first thing is kind of working out what kind of community you are, and Natalie's absolutely spot on. I mean, the kind of classic examples are shared problem. So people may be sufferers of a particular illness who want advice and to talk to other people who have a similar problem. I'm an archer, for example. That's one of the things I do in my spare time. So I go on to archery sites, talk to other archers about technique and about kit and things like that. So yeah, absolutely. Hyperlocal geography is only one example of community. There's lots of things that kind of bind people together. One of the first things for me is to use social media to actually find other like-minded people who are talking about what you're doing. I think one of the dangers with a community of interest sometimes is it can just be a blog. Now, a blog's great. I've got no problem with people blogging at all. It's a good way to find your voice, to start talking about what you want. But if you're writing for other people, you're kind of almost reporting for them. It's a different thing. And really, I think you need to sort of start finding people and talking to them as you get going. Find out if it's just you that's interested in a certain aspect, or whether other people are interested in that as well, and kind of not widen out too far, because that can make it less interesting for the person who actually starts out, but find out how that is.
I suppose one of the things, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point that you raised. What's the difference between a blog and a hyperlocal or community site? Because I suppose both want an audience, but to my mind, a blog is about your personal interests, whereas a community site should be about the community's interests. So therefore, it's about being in touch with that community, understanding whether that's a subject or an issue or a geography that you've got in common, understanding what the people who share that interest want and need and want to share in terms of information, and basing the site around a community's interest rather than your personal views. That seems to me one of the fundamental differences really between a blog and a community site of some kind.
Yeah, I'd fundamentally agree with that. I think it is kind of, I mean, take the radio, take a newspaper article. If you were doing something just purely for yourself, it'd be really dull. As you say, you've got to focus it outwards.
Yeah. Good. And I suppose in terms of building an audience, again, as you were saying, it's really about tapping into what that community wants to talk about or information about. And if you're providing the right information in the right way, then and there is an audience around that interest or that community interest, then the audience will grow and word of mouth will spread and so on. It may take a little while, but if you're providing a service of value to that community, then the audience should grow.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the element of what's sometimes called distributed journalism. So, I mean, that's kind of one of these fancy titles, and it basically means rather than just putting stuff on your own site, you might put it on Facebook, you might have something on YouTube or one of the audio channels, and we've got a question on that later. So you're going to where people are, as well as encouraging them to come to you. And I think that's kind of one of the crucial things as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, so here we are. We're live on the Google Hangout for the Community Journalism Online course from FutureLearn. Please feel free to ask questions live. You can do that by using the group chat function, which is the little blue box on the sidebar. If you click that, you can come up and enter messages and ask questions there, and we'll deal with them live. And there's also the Q&A function as well. But feel free to join the chat and join the conversation. Glenn and I are here to answer whatever questions we can over the next hour and this last week of the course. Okay, Glenn, Julius Salerno, next question, wants to ask, what about video? Mainstream newspapers are including more and more video on websites. Other examples of hyperlocals using video tools, and how do they use them? Well, yes, definitely there are, and I think we've probably covered it a little bit in the course of the MOOC, but video now is more and more common. It's certainly driving viewerships. It works well with mobiles. We've talked a lot about the importance of mobiles and mobile distribution. And of course, it's really easy with smartphones in particular to take video clips and even to edit video clips and upload them and so on. So I think video is becoming increasingly important, and it's increasingly easy to be able to do it just basically off your phone if you want, and to be able to upload it. Yeah. I mean, Glenn, have you got examples or other thoughts on that?
Not so much examples, just kind of a couple of tips. I mean, any of these extra technologies are brilliant, but you've got to think about what story you're telling before you start out. Kind of one of the big problems, I kind of work a lot with the tech side of things. One of the big problems you've got to think is that, about getting it off your phone, if you're going to use your phone. So either Wi-Fi or a cable. But yeah, I mean, good, compelling video that tells a story. I mean, a classic example, and I'm going to do it now. You'll probably see at the minute I'm sat sort of dead center. But if you're going to shoot video, a lot of people will actually say to you, get your subject slightly to one side, kind of looking at the camera, and suddenly it kind of slightly changes the dynamic of it. And it's just, there's a kind of little things that can make the difference between something useful and something that looks gorgeous. But the biggest thing is, if you don't have a great story, doesn't matter how beautiful it looks, people will watch something that's a bit rough and ready, maybe a bit shaky, if it tells a really good story.
Yeah, so it's what you're doing, or just a good clip if you're interviewing someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it does make a difference if you're able to include it. And of course, on most blogging platforms, including WordPress and so on. It's reasonably straightforward to include video clips online as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, taking YouTube or Vimeo as examples, two of the big video distribution platforms, they have what's called an embed code, and that's just a way of very slickly and easily making it appear that the video you've got there lives on your personal site.
Yeah, and it's a bit the same as sharing, YouTube clips on social media sites or something.
Yeah.
You cut and paste the code and up it'll appear.
Absolutely.
Okay, so get into video, use your phone, upload it, embed it, and just keep practicing with it. And it's really reasonably straightforward. But as with all of these things that we've talked about in this course, the best way of learning is just jumping straight in and having a go and learning as you do it. Great. Again, just to encourage people, feel free to ask questions on preferably I think we'll go for the Q&A function rather than group chat. But we've got people watching, but you seem to be all a bit reticent to ask questions unless there's something wrong at my end, which is entirely possible, but I don't think so. So feel free to ask any questions you want. Otherwise, we'll continue to plow on through some of the questions that have been asked in the discussion forums in the course site over the last week or two. Next one I've got here is Cliff Powsland. How do you mobilize your audience to be news gatherers for you? Is basically what Cliff's asking. He's saying he's trying to build a community site. He's trying to encourage his audience to join in and to help and to offer him tips and information about what's going on, but they all seem a bit reticent, and he wonders if it's perhaps because they're all over 55 years old. I hope not. As someone who's over 55, I still hope I'm able to contribute to lots of things. So Glyn, any thoughts there again on kind of building engagement and encouraging people to join in and take part and be a more active role rather than purely passive readers of a website or whatever?
I think this is one of the classics, to be honest. It's a great question because it's on one level, it's really hard. Because if you say to people, what's going on in your area that's interesting, people kind of go, yeah, you're the journalist, you know what's going on here. It's your site, your space.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit about what Cliff actually wants people to do. So, I mean, if people are sending him a one-line tip, that's a really nice starting point. And the kind of what you could do is almost interview them on kind of bit by bit basis to get them to give you that information. Now, I appreciate that's time consuming, and Cliff's probably doing other things around this as well. The other one is to have a simple form. So say using, I don't know, Google Documents.
Yeah.
It's free, embeds in a WordPress or other kind of blogging platform, whatever it is you want to use. And you could actually have key questions that you put in there. So what happened, when did it happen, any particular important thing, who saw, these kind of almost like a police incident report, I suppose. And that then will give people like Cliff the kind of information. So there's that level of getting people to share and trying to make it easy for them.
Yeah.
Getting contributors, the difficulty from what he's talking about is he's non-geographic. If he was an area one, I'd say, go down to the library, go and kind of talk to people, go and meet some people in real life. Because to me, good local community journalism should also be about offline as well as online.
Yeah.
In Cliff's terms, that's a little bit more difficult, but then there's going to be chat rooms, forums, Facebook pages where people will hang out. So it's kind of looking for the people who are engaging regularly there and speaking to them and see if they're interested. Is this kind of idea of that gets touted every now and again of the 1990? 1% of people, 1% of people are really engaged around a topic. So if you have a site, 1% of your readers, viewers, listeners will really engage. 9% love what you're doing and will join in from time to time, and 90% are really going to enjoy it, but from a distance.
Yeah.
And you're kind of looking for that 1% and also for that 9% and try and make them feel part of what you're doing, and they'll chip in when they feel they've got something to add.
Yeah, yeah, quite right. Very good. Okay. Again, we've got about 20 viewers or so at the minute, so it's on the live hangout. Obviously, lots of people will catch up with this recorded afterwards. But if you are live and you've got a question, please use the Q&A function. If you go over and bring up the kind of sidebar on the left-hand side of Google+, there's about a third of the way down, I think it says Q&A. Press on that and you can ask your questions and we'll try and answer them live. You all seem to be a bit hesitant this evening. Or you can ask questions on Twitter using the course hashtag. That's hashtag FLCJ, and hand us across that, and we'll field some of those questions towards us, I'm sure. So don't be shy, join in. But let's move on to the next question that's been asked on the course site over the last few weeks. So Angela Williams, is crime reporting best left to the professional journalist? How should a hyperlocal go about reporting very real but sensitive issues surrounding crime, theft, vandalism, or even missing persons? It's bound to be an issue in urban areas, or is it best left to the professionals? I mean, my take is no, it's not absolutely to the professionals. If you've got a geographical blog, that's going to be an issue that, you know, a lot of the potential audience are going to be interested in or concerned about. I mean, I think the only issues are, you know, not to try to, you know, name and shame, because you may end up in a libel situation.
Yeah.
You know, work with the police or the authorities and report what they're saying about things. But absolutely, those issues should be bread and butter for a community site of some kind, I'd have thought. Clear?
I agree. I mean, I think this is a cracking question. There are, as an ex-crime reporter once upon a time, I think this is kind of a good one for me. One of the big things about it is if you get information from the police, you are, it depends on your jurisdiction, okay? I'm talking about the UK. It applies in other jurisdictions, but I've got to be careful and say that. In the UK, you have a certain amount of legal protection if you are told something by the police. So as long as you, as Richard rightly said, report what they've said properly and fairly and timely, then you do have some protection if things turn out to be wrong later. Yeah, attaching blame is the biggest one here. Talking, there's kind of a change in the law. When somebody, up to the point a crime's committed, you can, as long as you're careful about what you're doing, you can talk about it. Once somebody's been charged by the police, you start to kind of be a lot more careful, and you'll probably notice this from the mainstream media. They're a lot more careful about what they're saying, and when it goes to court, you're just talking about really what's happening in court until they come out the other end. So Angela's right to be cautious, but she's absolutely right to cover things in her area. I mean, great way is if somebody's kind of graffitied on the wall, get a counsellor, police officer, if you have a community police officer in your area or equivalent, get them to tell you about it. And that way you're getting a kind of official line on it. These people are used to talking to the media about this kind of thing, so have a kind of a better idea, and it's not a bad way to start. Yeah, but yeah, keep it kind of impersonal. Maybe is that the right word to use? Yeah,
you're trying to stay neutral and above.
Yeah.
Not to get sort of sucked in emotionally and so on, because then you may stray into different areas.
Never say it was them what done it, I seen it. Have proof and evidence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but absolutely, those issues are really important for hyperlocal sites, I think, very much so.
Yeah.
So thanks for that one, Angela. Again, no questions coming out. Last time we did this, even though we had a slightly difficult time getting online and so on, there were lots of questions, and we don't seem to have any this week so far. So you know, the 20 or so of you watching live, come on, you must have a question. Get on the left-hand side, press Q&A, and you should be able to ask it, and it should pop up. If you're doing that and something's going wrong at the minute, I apologise, and if that is happening, feel free to tweet the fact, and we'll pick up on it and try and sort it out as we go along. But feel free to ask on Google Plus anything that you want to Glyn or I. The next question we have here is from Sue Flipping about using audio. So this is where you referred to this earlier.
Yeah.
Thoughts on using audio for a hyperlocal site? Sue used to be a radio journalist, so is obviously very comfortable with using audio. But wonders if there are analytics that tell us whether people like audio and use audio on mobiles and online as much as they read text, for example.
I don't know about as much as, but yeah, people definitely get value from it. I think one of the dangers from my perspective is if all you do is post an audio clip and expect somebody to listen to it, you're not giving them any choice.
Yeah. So
one of the things I often advise is if you record an interview, still take a couple of the key quotes out and put it into text. Don't assume that people are going to use your audio, but do it, absolutely. I mean, I've got a prop actually. I've got this. This is a little smartphone mic, and you'd probably be able to see it's a standard sort of jack. So it's got it's microphone and headphones, which means I can actually really nicely run a pair of headphones through it to make sure I'm getting the right kind of sound level. It cost me about, I think it was about £25. So it's, you know, it's not the end of the world at all. And what I've got, if I just do that, yeah, there's some of the apps I tend to use. So I've got the recorder that comes with the mic itself, which is a quite nice little one. It allows me to audio edit. I've got one that cost me about 79 pence or something like that. Great. I've got Audio Boom and SoundCloud, which is social networks. So audio social networks. And again, it will do, like we said about YouTube, you can kind of share audio from them. But the great thing is you can record straight to it, and it will use a 3G signal or Wi-Fi to kind of in the field report. So I'm actually quite a big fan of these things. For one, to actually capture for your own record, because going back to Angela's question, if you've got a record of what's been said, that increases your legal safety. I mean, it's a really simple thing, and journalists use either recorders or notepads to do that.
Yep.
So I think that's a good thing. But I always say to people, if you're doing that for your own notes or your own legal protection, share it, put it up there, embed it in your site. Just take it that people who are really interested will do it, and people who maybe not wanting to listen to audio on the fly. So when I'm on a bus, I don't always have headphones. So if I won't press the audio and annoy everybody else on the bus, but I'll read the quotes that you've taken out and put into the text, and maybe then listen to the audio when I get to work.
Yeah. So a bit like we were saying about video, have a go. And it's, you know, I think audio can definitely add an extra dimension, and play around with it and see what works for you and what you get some response to in whatever way you want to use it. So quite easy and simple to have a go and to use it. And SoundCloud, we talked about earlier in the course, is a really, you know, straightforward way of being able to embed audio onto a site and so on as well. So there are a number of other tools like that too. Yeah,
and I mean, both of the kind of social network ones I mentioned, Audio Boom and SoundCloud, will show you how many times people have played it. Yeah. So you'll get to see yourself, you know, whether what you're doing is working or not.
Yeah, so simple analytics in that sense. Good. Okay. So Nathan, one of our colleagues, has just relayed a question from the course page from Grace Essen, who says she found that there are some websites where you can create and distribute digital newspapers and magazines. Are those alternatives to making your own site? I'm not sure exactly what kind of websites she's referring to there, but presumably, you know, creating digital magazines online and being able to distribute them. I mean, yeah, it depends on the content. If it's just something where you aggregate other people's content, then that's a very different purpose from launching your own site and gathering your own material and really focusing in on your own community, be it geographical or community of interest. So, I mean, I think that's the key difference for me is the gathering of information and tailoring it to the interests of your particular audience, your particular interest group. If you're able to do that through, you know, some kind of digital magazine, then great. You know, there's no one platform that is necessarily the right one. You've got to play around with it and see what works and see what people use. I mean, I suppose the only other thing I'd say is how many of your audience are really going to access or find their way to accessing a digital magazine as opposed to a more straightforward blog platform or something. But, you know, experiment and see what works. But I think the crucial thing is, does it allow you to pull together, you know, information that's really targeted at the interests of your audience? Glyn?
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, my biggest sort of question, not knowing which platform Grace is on about, my biggest question is, as you said, how are people going to find it? Now, you can quite easily give your own site a kind of a more magazine-y rather than news kind of feel anyway. Repurpose a bit of a content for something like this. I mean, one of the student groups I work with, their team use Issue, which is a digital magazine platform. It turns it into a kind of a PDF which you can read online and share. But the difficulty is how to find it. I mean, if it's to people that Grace knows are interested in this, or she's got some kind of mailing list, you could even use something like MailChimp. which is a nice kind of newslettery email send out. So, I mean, yeah, these things are great. It is just, for me, how do people get to, if you're doing all this great stuff, how do you get it to people?
Yeah, I mean, something like MailChimp, which is, as you say, you input a whole bunch of email addresses and it sends the same kind of newsletter or the same content out to them all very easily and simply. But that's a kind of means of distribution. So it's a bit like people subscribing to a digital magazine, you adding their address to MailChimp, which then sends it out to, you know, all of those people who said they're interested in it. But, you know, it's about, is that going to limit the number of people who are going to find what you're doing or not, is a judgment I think you have to make.
Yeah, I agree.
Good. Okay. So again, please feel free to ask some questions, and there are still quite a few of you watching. But come forward, ask questions if you can. If you can work out how to get to the Q&A bit on the sidebar. Meanwhile, Matt Davis has a question on the changing role of the editor. He wants to ask: in the modern world of hyperlocal, is there a place for an editor now, or is it replaced by different experts? So, do you want to start off on this, Glenn? I've got some views, but it's not, you know, not fair for me to always go first. So go on.
I don't know. I mean, it depends what we mean by editor. Is somebody who kind of runs a site, somebody who kind of decides what the kind of overall feel of it is. I mean, I know there are the Bristol Cable, for example, as a hyperlocal in the UK, is a co-op. So they're very much a team who works together. There's a really nice co-op in South Wales as well. So I don't know. I mean, the kind of, it's what do you mean? Is it a role of somebody to kind of tidy up text and kind of put things together and make it clean and easily to read? I would argue yes. But then again, that's partly my history as well. That's one of the things I've done. I think really good, simple communication can sometimes be a tricky thing to get right. And if it's somebody's job to kind of give that an overall feel, to kind of tidy it up and make it really useful and user-friendly and all those kind of things that you'd want from a website, I would say yes. No one person can do everything. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people who can do loads of different things, but there are people in your own communities who may be able to help you with stuff. And I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier on about Cliff's question. Find the people who are interested. Find people who can do the things if that's what you're worried about. Yeah.
I mean, I'd say I think somebody has to decide what the site or the service is about and what its kind of values are, the style of it. Is it going to be very chatty and informal, or is it going to be a bit more formal as well? Someone has to make those decisions, and it can be a single person who we might have called an editor, or it can be a group of people if they all agree on what those parameters are. But I mean, that's what editing is really, is about, you know, what are the criteria by which we make the choices of what information we use and how we present it. And that has to happen for it to be a really effective site. And it can be because one person leads it, or because there's a group of people who have worked out between themselves a common set of principles about how they're going to run it. And it doesn't really matter if it's one person or if it's a team who agree, but you do need to have some principles or criteria that define what it is you're trying to do, I think. If you're really, you know, going to try and build it and raise the quality of it, that's what I would suggest. Okay, we had a question online now live from Andrew Christie, who says, this is a good one: should community journalists get registered with a professional body and get a press card? If so, how can a solo reporter working on an ad hoc, non-paid basis do this? So my kickoff on that is it's not essential. I don't actually think for a hyperlocal community journalist you need worry too much about that. If you want to, or if you want to try and join the NUJ in the UK, the Journalists Union, so on, there may be bodies who will, you know, accept what you're doing on a community basis. Some of them may not. But there may be, you know, you have, what are the advantages of joining it? What does it help you network? Does it help give you some kind of advice and support? And if it doesn't, then don't bother. If you think it does, then you have to decide whether it's worth the price of doing that, I guess. But Glenn, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really it's a real good question of the moment. What does press actually mean in one way? I would say start off, no. Start from my simple rule with a lot of this kind of everything. Don't pay anything. There have been issues around courts coroners, so in inquests in the UK, where hyperlocals haven't been able to go in because they're not recognised as members of the press. As Richard said, my starting point would be, if you are interested in covering these kind of things, go speak to them. Actually, the thing about a press card is it's a little thing that says I am a recognised member of a press. Is a commercial body that holds information about that person and can verify it. And I've had it verified by the police and by military and things like that. But if you're not doing those kind of stories on a regular basis, then I wouldn't. Obviously, union support is often used for employment matters. You get that with the NUJ card. There is a freelance section of the NUJ that can offer help, support and advice about getting paid and things like that, copyright. But to be honest, start from the question, do you actually need it? And I think Richard's right. Ask around the sort of authorities in your community and see if they require it. Nobody needs to be registered to tell the news. No,
anybody's entitled to do that job, and access to courts and so on is open to the public, so therefore it's open to you whether you run a hyperlocal.
Yeah, I mean that's where there is a problem though. There are conventions. I mean, certainly in UK courts there are issues that are you recognised as a member of a press? And some areas I think are more forward thinking than others. If you sit in a public area with a notepad and pen, you can get sometimes into quite a bit of trouble. You can also get into trouble if you pull out an audio recorder. It's like any other sort of news beat, really. You've got to know the rules of play. And sometimes some courts think to be a journalist you must have a press card. But I think that's a bit retrograde, to be honest. It's a bit old school.
It's as you were saying, it's only if you're going to do certain sorts of stories. And of course, a lot of community journalism sites, define themselves as not being professional press and not being professional media. So therefore, probably wouldn't want to sign up to professional press organizations in that sense, because they define themselves as being, not part of that group. So, I think it depends on the kind of site you're working on, the kind of service you're trying to do, the kind of stories you're trying to cover, and your own, needs and preferences. But it's an option, but it's only an option. It's by no means essential, and I wouldn't worry about it too much personally. Okay, let's keep going. Keep answering. Thank you for asking that question online, Andrew, and I'd encourage the others to do so as well. Meanwhile, we'll move on with the ones we got submitted in advance here. So Irving Carrero asked, what's the average community size of a hyperlocal? I'm not sure there is any average.
No. I mean, what kind of my experience has shown me that there's everything from kind of, I know people who do it for this street, for about 10, 20 houses, right through to a suburb or a city. I mean, whether city meets a kind of original definition of hyperlocal, I'm not sure. But no, I mean, there's no such thing. I mean, it's like saying, is there an average community? No, there's not. It comes down to what Fawad's interested in, but kind of, oh, sorry, wrong question, Irving's interested in. How much he feels confident about covering. Does he want to cover a postcode area, a block, as it's called in some countries? It really comes down to it. I like kind of area levels. So I do when I've done stuff, it's been around UK electoral wards.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a nice size area, a lot going on, but it's not too big.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose there are hyperlocals which have an audience of measured in the dozens, and there are others that are measured in the hundreds and thousands, or even tens of thousands. By the time you start getting to the tens of thousands, you're really starting to compete with professional media, and of course that is the route that some community sites and hyperlocals take. They grow until they effectively become a kind of commercial or mainstream service. But it can be anything from a few dozen up to several thousand, really. Okay, thanks for that, Irving. Again, Andrew says, thanks for the feedback. It overlaps the question I'd asked on the forum, so I think that's covered too. Good. Well, we aim to please and be efficient. Thank you, Andrew. Others, feel free to ask us anything you want. Meanwhile, we'll plow on through some of these questions that we've got here. Fawad Baig, I'm not sure where Fawad's from, but he says, can you tell us that if there are specific media laws and ethical constraints which are common among the countries all over the world? Okay, slightly complicated one this. So ethical constraints, again, that will vary from culture to culture and the kind of site you are. So, you know, you may decide, you know, if you were in, I don't know, Hollywood, you may decide to do a Hollywood gossip hyperlocal, in which case, you know, your ethics might be very different from that of a service serving a small rural community or something, for example. So, you know, what ethics are variable. Personally, you know, I believe you need to have a sense of responsibility about what you do and a sense of public responsibility, but, you know, these things are personal. In terms of law, again, of course, law varies from country to country, but I guess there are common strands. So libel, you know, not printing lies about people or being able to back up or support with evidence anything that you're saying, you know, in your site, because you're publishing in public, is one important principle which may be defined in different ways in different countries, but that's one common stream. Understanding the kind of, as we've been talking about earlier in this hangout, what the rules are around court reporting or political reporting in your particular country or district. Again, those will vary from area to area and place to place, but there will be some restrictions about what you can and can't say about official proceedings, so you need to be clear about those. Then other thoughts on what are some of the kind of general legal themes that might run across countries that people need to think about?
I think I'm going to just answer it slightly differently, and I'll come back to that sort of the question you've asked. I think for me, the simple way of dealing with this is actually kind of, there's a meme on the internet. I'm going to change it slightly, just in case anybody has tender disposition. Don't be a plonker, I think is one of the kind of simplest rules to go by. You're going to be meeting people that you're talking about. So if it's a hyperlocal and you're covering your town or your street, people will get to know you. They know who you are. You will have to answer for what you do. So if you are kind of decent in your dealings with people, if you're straightforward, if you never assume that a picture you find on the internet belongs to somebody else, it doesn't belong, you can just use it. Don't take it, ask. You ask, respect people. And I think, you know, when it comes to the law as well, if you are aware that people's reputations are important, and before you start really sort of saying that they're wrong or wrongdoing, you're checking it out, you're trying to verify it, you're getting a response and saying, look,
Okay, so it seems
sorry
as
about
if
that.
that's all right. It seems to be some kind of Google server error, but we seem to be back. So, and we've added a couple of viewers. So I don't know how that works. Anyway, you were mid answer on this question of behaving responsibly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know where I dropped out now. So if I repeat myself, I do apologise. Yeah, it's a kind of, I think it's a multi-layered thing. People will trust you more if you're straightforward. You'll make a better name for yourself. The authorities will respect you more. And when you come to challenge people, that will be taken seriously rather than some, you know, oh, you know, this is that person who's going to be aggressive with us.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got a kind of tough question to ask, that will be respected. So, I mean, broadly, if you look at laws, kind of journalism ethics, it kind of boils down to think about what you're doing. Don't have to be nice to people in the sense you don't ask tough questions, but do start with some respect, and you'll find that actually that does work a lot for you.
I think that's a good word. I think respect is a good word, and being kind of fairly straight and open about what you do and how you work. And
absolutely.
That gets you through most situations, I think. Okay, we've had another question posted from our colleague Nathan, picked up off the course site, from Pedro Martinez. How can we find a balance between unpaid collaborators and professionals? How can we have independent and small media without destroying the profession? Glyn, is community journalism and indeed the kind of overlap of citizen journalism going to destroy the profession?
It's yeah, again, an absolutely great question. I don't think so. I mean, if you look at, so taking our journalism school, for example, if you look at what's taught now compared to what was taught kind of 45 years ago when it first started, there are masses and masses of different skills that are being taught. The advantage of being kind of doing this day in, day out for a living is that you need to update your skills. You've probably got time to do it as well. I like collaborative models. So up in the north of Wales, up in Wrexham, they work, Wrexham.com do some work with the local newspaper group. You know, they share things together. I think that is the correct approach. There are some things that having a big team of people at your disposal you can do. I think sometimes, though, they are more distributed. They kind of maybe in a centralized office away from a particular town or village. So I think I'd like to think that it's much more a symbiotic relationship, which will kind of be to the benefit of those who are interested in what's happening in the community.
Well, I think that's the ideal. Of course, it does vary from country to country, and the whole media ecology varies from country to country. But I haven't really heard of community sites putting mainstream media out of business anywhere. I mean, in the end, citizen journalism and community media works at a much more local, a much more focused level. And as Glyn has said, sometimes it can complement professional media, which works on a much kind of broader scale and bigger scale, and can feed into it. But I don't ever think it's likely to kind of be a direct economic threat in that way. It works in a different way with different models and a much more kind of local and more focused sense. So I don't really think that if there's a proliferation of independent and small community or interest group focused media, that's necessarily going to be destroy the profession. I mean, the profession is more open now, more easier to take part, much easier to contribute. But that's just a different kind of media ecology that we're living in, and I don't think it's going to be this sort or that sort. It's going to be a mix of all sorts.
Yeah, and I mean, what we have seen is where media companies have closed down outlets, so professional outlets. We've had everything from community groups, concerned citizens, through to professional journalists who now are independent, setting up hyperlocals. So, I mean, on one level, the Caerphilly Observer in South Wales is a great example. Rich Gurner, who runs that, he's gone from having a community website to actually doing a print edition for his community. He believed his community wasn't being effectively served, so he chose to do something about it, and he had skills, some skills to be able to do that, and he's doing very well at it.
Yeah, no, indeed. Okay, we've got about just over 15 minutes left. I've got 2 or 3 questions here. Feel free to come in and ask more if you want. You've got about 15 minutes to do it. Otherwise, we'll work through what we've got here, and if there are no other questions and we finish early, we'll finish early. But let's see how we get on. So the next one is from Mark Pawson, and it's another kind of ethical issue, really. It's about, he says, the ethics of naming individuals in an article. It would be useful to address the question of naming individuals in an article, particularly if you're either disagreeing with their views or being critical of them in some way. Is it necessary to give a right of reply? How do we avoid being sued? So, I mean, I suppose the first thing is make sure if you're saying something critical about someone, make sure that you've got good evidence or good grounds for doing it. I would always offer a right of reply. I think that's about being straight and open with people. And I think actually being open and allowing people the right of reply will help you through any kind of legal or other problems. If you say, actually, here's a point of view, here's one perspective on it, but you're open to them defending themselves or offering a different perspective, that fairness, that general straight dealing of fairness will probably get you through. But the main thing is, avoid libel. So if you're saying something about someone, you better be able to prove that it's right, rather than it just being your opinion. Show the evidence for it, being able to back it up. Otherwise, you just need to be careful about the way that you phrase things and attribute views and so on, and make sure that the readers are very clear about what's being said, who's saying it, and what the evidence and what the grounds are for saying it. I think that openness and showing your evidence, showing your workings, as a maths teacher used to say, is a very important principle.
Yeah, I fundamentally agree with that last bit. I think the thing that interests me about Mark's question is this idea of ethics. What's the ethics of it? I'm wondering if he's wondering about people remaining anonymous for ethical reasons, so they're not named in their community. I think that is, I think it, as Richard said, it depends on what people are being accused of, I guess. If you're saying they've done something wrong, Richard's nailed it, prove it, or have beyond a reasonable doubt. Is it wrong to name people who are speaking about something, who are sort of putting themselves out on an issue? No, because they're putting themselves out, and if it affects your community. So, for example, there was an issue in the US a little while ago about a councillor refusing and arguing, saying he shouldn't be named for saying what he said in council meetings and similar. He works for the public. He's an elected official. Sorry, my view is you're being named on that one. If you've got to stick your neck out, they have the right to do that and to defend themselves, and you've got the right to ask them questions about it.
I suppose the other thing is, if you have a particular position on an issue or an interest in it, so if there's, I don't know, planning issue and it affects you directly and so or something, then you need to be open about that, I think. Yeah. Otherwise you will undermine your own credibility. So if you're going out criticizing a plan for local development because you're worried it's going to affect your own property, then if you're not open with people about it, they will find out, and then they'll start to discount whatever you say about it, because oh well, they would say that, wouldn't they? So let's ignore that. But if you're open about it from the start, that says, look, this affects me because in this way, and here's my view about it, then people will listen to it. And I personally think you ought to be open to offering the other point of view as well. But transparency about your own interests in an issue, I think, is a very important principle.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got another question from a live viewer, as it were. Sue Breach. Hi, Sue. Thanks for asking something. Do we see a future where there'll be government support for hyperlocals in the same way there's support for community radio? Would that be to our benefit or because of regulation to the detriment of hyperlocals? So, I think there are some models where there is government support, and that's being discussed. I can see how it might be advantageous for some hyperlocals. I'm not sure it's about regulation so much as there may be conditions around the financial support which you may or may not object to, or may not find difficult. So I think it depends on what you're trying to do and whether you think government support or local authority support in some way is going to create a conflict for you. Obviously, if you want to report and therefore potentially be critical of a body that's also funding you, there's going to be a problem there. So what kind of site is it? What kind of information and journalism are you doing may influence the extent to which you are open to that kind of sponsorship and support. But we certainly see that being talked about as a way of trying to encourage more community journalism and hyperlocal journalism in some areas. Glenn?
Yeah, there are groups that are kind of working towards things like that. So, for example, in the UK, there's Talk About Local, who do quite a lot of work in this area. There's also people I know who are getting the idea of block selling of hyperlocals. So, there is an idea in Wales that if all the sort of Welsh hyperlocals can be put together, they can be marketed to the Welsh government and other authorities as a block distribution channel, because they'll be reaching lots of local communities. So I think there is this kind of informal network effect. I think maybe something that if hyperlocals are kind of prepared to work together and kind of network in that way, I think that could be one of the things that will kind of support a little bit what I think Sue's thinking about, and also backs up then what you're saying about it gives, as a big media advertising house in London, would I be bothered in a hyperlocal that covers one particular street in Cardiff? No, I wouldn't. I mean, it's just not the way the kind of logistics and the money flows in that kind of thing. But if by that site and, you know, hundreds of others across maybe the southwest of the UK or the whole of the UK, yes, of course I'd be interested in that, because I'm reaching out to a very engaged audience of people.
Yeah.
You know, they're there. They're not just flicking through Guardian, BBC, whatever. They are there because they care about what's happening. So that's actually, on one level, that's quite a good way to target people.
Yeah, agree. Sue's added a quick another question here, picking up off our previous answer about naming people, and Sue asked about the jigsaw effect.
Yes. Jigsaw identification. Yeah.
Be aware of it, but obviously hyperlocal sites may not be. So do you want to quickly explain the jigsaw problem?
Yeah, the idea is, and it particularly kind of often pertains to court reporting where there's banning orders. So, I mean, when a young person goes to court, there's a bunch of kind of laws, but it effectively boils down to you can report it, but you don't give any information away so people will know who they are. And the problem is sometimes if a bunch of different people are working in the same space, one might say they go to a particular school, one might say they're a particular age, one might say they're kind of from a certain area of a town. And that can kind of nail down and drill down until you can find people. So that's the idea of this jigsaw effect that we're talking about. The simple rule is just think about what you're saying. If you think that you are going to give too much detail, just back off a little bit. One of the things that journalists do, and I've done it countless times in court reporting, you don't talk about the story you're going to write, because that's your story, and you report that in the way that your audience wants, that you think is a key thing. But we do talk to one another about these kind of issues and say, how will you describe this person? Is there anything I need to watch out for? So if you're doing that kind of thing, I'd speak to the other people there, the other hyperlocals. If there's mainstream journalists there, have a chat with them, find out. It's not wrong to say, look, I'm worried just in case I inadvertently name somebody. Can I check how you're playing that part of it?
Yeah, good advice there. Good, okay. Another question online from Alexandra Andrioli. Now that she has a clear idea on what to do, how to introduce her community journalism website to people, should she already have the site and some content ready, or is a template enough? How do you launch, basically? You launch yourself to the world.
Yeah, so we're talking in a way about what's called a hard or a soft launch in sort of online terms. Alexandra, if you've not got anything ready yet, go for what's called a soft launch. And I would start off with something like a Facebook page or equivalent, something where you can just start putting things up that people can see while you're working on your site. The problem is, it's like any other product. I mean, what you're doing is probably not commercial, but if you turn up to an empty space and somebody goes, I've got this great site, and you come there and there's nothing there, they'll go, I'm not coming back. But the problem for you is, if you're putting loads of great stuff up there and nobody's seeing it, you might feel disheartened. So I'd probably actually start using, I think maybe Facebook in this particular instance would be one of my favorite things. Start getting small things up, maybe a few pictures around your community, maybe a little bit of audio or video, as we were talking about earlier. Then you can start to put stuff on your site. While you're doing that, you're using social media tools to find people who might be interested in what you're doing in your area, and you are contacting them and saying, I've got these pages, I've got a website, I've got stuff on it, I'd be really interested in some feedback, I think it might be interesting to you. You've got to be careful so you don't spam people, so you don't get annoying. But I would say start off gently if it's new to you. If it's not, go for it. Put the site up, put content on it and shout about it. But you may find collaborators, you may find people who are interested in joining you and helping out if you kind of go with a more soft launch.
I think it's quite good to under-promise and over-deliver, isn't it? So,
yeah.
I mean, tell people about it, but play it down a little bit so when they come and think, oh, wow, this is much better than I expected, as opposed to selling it very hard and people come to it and think, it wasn't quite as good as I was hoping for. So under promise and over deliver is always a good principle. Okay, I've got another one, another question here off Twitter from user @ZebraRed. How do we prevent hyperlocals reproducing existing power structures as opposed to empowering everyone? I guess that's, how do you prevent hyperlocals kind of becoming like mainstream media rather than continuing to empower a community? There could be a whole book on that, really. Glenn, have you got any thoughts about how does hyperlocals continue to be collaborative and open rather than get drawn into being more like mainstream media?
Yeah, I think one of the kind of issues we've got at the minute, certainly in the UK, around sort of regulation of the media and things, is there is that kind of danger that hyperlocals could potentially just become another kind of local newspaper. I think the key thing for me is why ZebraRed wants to do what they want to do. I think that's got to be a starting point. I mean, if you look at take UK newspapers as an example, if you look at the ethos between The Guardian and the Daily Mail, they're two really very, very different organisations. They have different power structures. They're funded in different ways. Okay, they're mainstream journalism, so their similarities is a kind of pattern of how to report and things like that. But stay true to what you're trying to do. If you are about advocacy and supporting people in your community, what you do and how you act will be completely different to somebody trying to do it purely to make money. Now, no journalist I know does that. They are, mainstream journalists are advocates for their communities, as far as I'm concerned. But at the same time, they are working within particular setups. So if you don't want a kind of editor who is the only person who sets the tone of it, become a cooperative. Yeah. Work together. Cooperatives work. We've seen examples from the school. Our colleagues who do research on hyperlocals have shown that there are some really good collectives. The issue there is, as people kind of move on in their life or they get too busy, they may drop out and the dynamic changes, and that's always an issue for any organisation. But I think that's a key one. If you try what you do, you won't have a problem.
Yeah, it comes back a bit to that earlier question we had about do you need editors or not? And you don't have to have an editor, but you do need some form of kind of agreed principles of what this site is about and what its standards and values are that you all buy into. And it can work as a cooperative like that, or it can work as an editor, and it depends on what you're comfortable with and what you want to do, really. But it's there are lots of different ways of doing it. Okay, well, look, we are a couple of minutes off the hour, and we have run out of questions. So I think we'll probably call it to an end there. There's one last comment from Sue Breach. Thank you, Sue, who says, thanks for your responses. It's been a great hour. And she's thinking about including the occasional hangout in her hyperlocal. So that's probably a good point at which to end on that very positive note. So
yeah, and I think, Sue, great idea. Get your counsellors involved, get your kind of, get people on air, get them talking, but absolutely.
Live broadcasting, it's the future, indeed. Okay, Glenn, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Obviously, this will be posted up on the site and on YouTube in due course. I very much hope you've enjoyed the our course in online course in community journalism and hyperlocal journalism and social and digital media. Please stay in touch with us. Please stay in touch through the network on the Centre for Community Journalism that we've been linking through to at C4CJ on Twitter. We'd love to keep in touch with all of you who've been taking the course and hear how you progress, and hopefully continue to help and support each other. So thanks very much for being part of the course, and thanks for watching today. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.